Alrighty, welcome to another monthly recap. This is for the month ending on Sunday, technically, March 2024. So, a lot to get into. March is, of course, Women's History Month. We had St. Patty's Day a couple weeks ago, and then Easter is on Sunday. For those who celebrate, happy Easter. Yeah, I'm getting together with my sister for Easter brunch, so that'll be nice. Anyways, love March. Things start to turn green. Beginning of the end for winter. I'm all for it. So, let's talk about March. A couple things. One, we got some interesting unemployment numbers. We're going to be starting off with that when we start our presentation here in a couple seconds. That's important because unemployment and inflation data are the two biggest data points that the Fed cares about when they decide when they're going to start to cut rates. To that end, we also got a Fed meeting just last week, and I want to talk about those results as well and the kind of guidance that they gave the markets, which is really, really interesting stuff. Maybe primarily if you're a money nerd like me, but interesting in general, I think still. And then we avoided not one, not two, but three government shutdowns in March. It's absolutely insane. It's gotten to be so commonplace that you probably didn't even realize there was three times where we almost had a government shutdown. Totally nuts. And I'm going to be talking about some of the drama that's going on right now in the House of Congress. They're currently on recess. They're going to be getting back to it in just a week or two here. So, yeah, could be a potential for a lot of drama there. Mortgage rates as a whole, they hung pretty steady. 7% at the end of last month to about 6.875% roughly today. That's for your first-time home buyer making less than 120% of the area median income, the typical scenario that I quote. So yeah, rates remained fairly stable. There's a lot of kind of volatility throughout the month, but all in all, they settled rather close to what they ended up last month. So let's talk about unemployment. And I really, really, really like this cartoon. It's actually from 2020, but it's like perfect for what's going on right now. So what's happening is the Fed is getting all this data in with regards to inflation, and they're like, hey, when do we start to start to cut rates so that jobs can start to come back? When they start to cut rates, all of a sudden businesses can borrow more money at a cheaper rate and hire more people. So jobs market and the Fed funds rate, they go very similar to one another. The Fed has a lot to say about what's going on there. So let's get into that piece. So we get two main employment reports every month. ADP, that is the private sector employment report. They showed 140,000 jobs being created in February. It was pretty close to expectations of 150,000, but it was a slight miss, very small miss. The bigger story, though, is the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics. Okay, that is the government's report. Okay, they showed 275,000 jobs being created in February. Like, it's a crazy number. Huge divergence from ADP's figures. I mean, almost double. However, they revised the prior report for January by 124,000 jobs. And then they revised December lower by 43,000 jobs. BLS has struggled with this for quite some time. They release these crazy blockbuster numbers, and then over the next couple of revisions, they shrink them and shrink them and shrink them. And it's been significantly divergent from their counterpart in ADP. Shocking, absolutely shocking figures. BLS really needs to figure out what's going on and figure out how to fine-tune their mechanics, because whatever they're doing right now is simply not working. But with this, the unemployment rate ticked up from 3.7% to 3.9%. And that's approaching a psychologically important level, which is 4%. The Fed does not want to see unemployment exceed 4%. And we're getting awfully close. And not just that, but next week, quite literally next week, we're going to get updated unemployment numbers. Are we going to hit 4% or not? The markets are all paying very close attention to this. So here's the Fed. And the Fed is like, hey, we got all this data. We're just going to keep rates elevated, And they're basically, holding jobs underneath the water. And they're starting to really struggle here. And the question is, when does the Fed feel comfortable in the data to then start to cut rates so that the jobs can start to rebound a little bit? It's a very interesting dynamic that's kind of at play going on right now between the unemployment market and the Fed. And it also has to do with inflation. My favorite topic, your least favorite topic, I know. Inflation for February was another kind of disappointing month. Mildly disappointing, but disappointing nonetheless. So let's get into that real fast. So consumer price index, that's inflation as you and I feel it, right? There's the headline figure, all in inflation, everything included. And then there's the core figure, which is if you remove volatile food and energy components, what is the actual inflation? Fed cares more about core than they care about headline, and they care more about personal consumption expenditures, PC, this last one on here, than they care about consumer price index or PPI, producer price index. Producer price index is wholesale inflation. inflation on the wholesale level, what businesses pay for raw goods. So starting with CPI, headline rose 0.44% in February. It increased very slightly year over year from 3.1 to 3.2%. Not a huge difference, not a big deal. It's okay. The core rate actually decreased slightly from 3.9 to 3.8%, which says, hey, look, energy prices most likely increased, which is what caused this increase. And again, when you remove that, all of a sudden we actually see a slight decrease. So that's fine. The bigger kind of shocker in these two reports was PPI. The headline figure rose 0.6%. It increased the year over year numbers from 1% to 1.6%. That was a significant move. And it means that companies are still paying a fair amount for the raw goods that are coming through the door. They then repackage those, pass those along to consumers, and that eventually, theoretically, leads to consumer price index. The core rate increased 0.3% and actually remained steady at 2%. Personal consumption expenditures, we got that quite literally today. Okay, today, Friday, March 29th, we got that today. So the headline rose 0.3% in February, increased 0.1% to 2.5% year over year. Okay, that's a headline figure. Fed really cares about core. That increased 0.3% as well, decreased slightly from 2.884 to 2.784. The reason I'm extending that out 3 decimal points, okay, is because what happens is when you see these headlines, they just round down. So they would have said, hey, look, consumer price or personal consumption expenditures rather remain stable at 2.8% because they're rounding numbers down. But there was actually a slight decrease. It's just not noticeable if you round it down to 1 decimal point, which is what most of the headlines do. So keep that in mind. The numbers did improve very slightly on the core PCE number. That's what the Fed wants to see. Okay, the Fed primarily concerns themselves with the personal consumption expenditures core rate, and that remained stable according to the headlines and actually decreased very slightly. That's okay. It's mildly disappointing. It could have been better. It could have been worse. It's mildly disappointing. But we have these two pieces that are arguing. We've got inflation that's being really stubborn, and the Fed wants to see core PCE get down to 2%. Well, we're still a ways off. And not only that, but when you look at the next reports, it's going to be very tricky to get down to that 2% level. But they want core PCE to reach 2%. Okay, so they have that. They want to keep rates elevated to stop us consumers from spending money to get that inflation to start coming down. However, they also have the unemployment market, which is going in the wrong direction. Unemployment rates ticked up. More people are losing the job. Those that get laid off are losing their jobs, are taking longer to find jobs. So that's tricky. How do they balance these two things? They want to cut rates to help out the employment market, but they don't want to cut rates because they want to have inflation going down. And then the last thing I want to talk about on that front real fast is this. So this is a personal savings rate. This is from Fred, which is like the St. Louis Fed. So historically, the personal savings rate, it kind of moves around in the 5 to 8% range. Right? And then once the pandemic happened, people started saving money at an all-time high clip. They were saving money at, 32%, 22%. Shocking, right? Pandemic hit, everybody locked themselves in their house, stopped spending money, started saving money like it was end of days. And what happened was their savings rate skyrocketed at 32%. So what we're seeing now is we're seeing the personal savings rate at 3.6%, which is the lowest rate since December of 2022. And it's significantly lower than most of these numbers that you see on this chart, right? 8%, 9%, 6%, 5%. So the moral of that story, the takeaway from that story is we are saving less money than we ever have before, and we are still spending money. Something's got to give eventually. And the Fed doesn't want to break the economy. And if something gives and it breaks the economy, that's exactly what the Fed's trying to avoid. They're trying to have a soft landing where they can avoid a recession, start cutting rates, have inflation get tamed. It's a very, very tricky scenario that they are trying to navigate. All of this led up to the Fed meeting. Okay, so the Fed met last week. The Fed left rates unchanged in the range of 5.25 to 5.5%. And they also released their dot plot. Okay, their dot chart. They only do this a few times a year. I marked down here the upcoming meetings. The ones with an asterisk are the ones where they will actually release another chart similar to this. Okay, so here's where the Fed funds rate currently is. Okay, and this is 2024, where the Fed members want rates to go. This is 2025, 2026, and then this is longer term, which they don't even define. Generally speaking, what do you want rates to be at? So rates are currently in this level right here. there's 19 members on this chart, 2 of which said, hey, we don't want any rate cuts. 2 of which said we only want 1 rate cut of 0.25%. 5 members said they want 2 rate cuts. 9 members said they want 3 cuts. This was really good news for the market. And the reason why is because when you see these kind of disappointing inflation numbers, the concern is, oh, well, the Fed might not cut rates as quickly as they said they were going to. Well, they met last week and they said, we're still planning on cutting rates 3 times in 2024. The markets took that as a huge sigh of relief. Great. Inflation's not coming down as quick as the Fed would want, but they still have this plan in place and they're still sticking to it, which is planning on cutting rates around 3 times. Now, to give you a little bit more insight, there's what they call hawks and doves. Doves want to be more financially accommodative. So this person right down here, the person that wants 4 rate cuts, this is the dove. This is the doviest of doves. Okay. Up here, these are the hawks. Hawks want to be less financially accommodative. So what we're seeing like 4 members in the hawk camp, 10 members in the dove camp, and then 5 members that are kind of splitting the difference. But generally speaking, though, there's more doves than there are hawks. That's potentially good news for future rate cuts. With the upcoming meetings, Fed will be meeting on May 1st. All the traders have this date circled, June 12th. The hope is, fingers crossed, if the Fed is going to cut rates 3 times, maybe they start cutting rates on June 12th. This is one of the longer meetings that they have. This is one where they release an updated dot chart. They can give a little bit more guidance and a little bit more intel on their logic. These other meetings are a little bit more abbreviated. Again, the ones with the asterisks are a little bit more in depth. So that's the hope. The hope is the markets are still hoping for 3 rate cuts, and they're hoping that the Fed's going to start to cut rates starting June 12th. That's what we're hoping for. That would be really, really good news. It would at least let the markets know, hey, look, take a deep breath. As bad as things are, that's about as bad as they're going to get, right? That's what they're hoping for. As I mentioned at the outset, we avoided not 1, not 2, but 3 government shutdowns. It's just shocking. Like, how is this not bigger news? How do people not know about this more? But that's the case. So on February 29th, they passed temporary funding, which barely kicked the can. They barely kicked the can like a week down the road and said, hey, look, we'll punt on this. We'll deal with this on March 8th and March 22nd. So what happened? That was the first avoidance of a shutdown. Then on March 8th, again, half of the government set to shut down on March 8th. On March 8th, no time to spare, they passed the first half of government funding, which was funding a number of departments through September 30th. Then March 23rd. I mentioned this was set to expire March 22nd. Like, they actually missed this deadline by a hair. But they passed the second half of government funding, all funded through September 30th. So that's great news. You no longer have to hear me talk about government shutdowns for another 6 months, we'll call it. Okay, that's great news. Now, on another episode of Days of Our Congress. Now, due to all of these temporary funding bills and due to the compromises that were struck, a number of members, especially within the Freedom Caucus, you know me, try to avoid politics, but this is objective. Several members within the Freedom Caucus were very upset. They were very upset about the compromises that were struck. They were not happy at all. And right before the Congress went into recess, they now threatened to oust Mike Johnson, brand new Speaker of the House, for all of 5 months. So they threatened to oust him due to the compromises that were struck. That's how his predecessor got kicked out. So you would hear a lot more about this, except the Congress is currently on recess. They come back to session on April 9th. It'll be very interesting to see if they've had a couple weeks to cool down and now all of a sudden cooler heads do prevail and everybody calms down a little bit, or are they going to come back swinging? If there's more additional fallout, it's going to be really interesting to keep our eyes on. All right, looking ahead to April. So next week is Jobs Week. We get ADP report, the private sector report on the 3rd. We get Bureau of Labor Statistics report on the 5th. We get job openings and labor turnover survey. That's on Tuesday. That shows how many help wanted signs there are, but that's been pretty volatile and not really reliable as of late. We also get updated inflation data in the middle of the month in CPI and PPI, and then PCE almost a month from now. The Fed is meeting on May 1st, but there's no rate decisions expected. It's going to be a shorter meeting. We're not expecting a whole lot to come from the Fed at that meeting. So yeah, that's what happened in March. That's what we got our eyes on in April. And if you have any questions, as always, let me know. Thank you all so much for your referrals. It truly does mean the world to me and my team. It's the lifeblood of our business. We never take it for granted. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate you. And if you have any questions, let us know. Thank you all so much. Appreciate you. Bye.